It's just correcting for errors using actual experimental results. Okay. Also, Newton's equations of gravity were good but not perfect. Einstein's equations of gravity are much more accurate. This is why experimentation is so important. This is why hypotheses are formed. You can make claims all day and night, but if you can't make testable claims or accurate predictions, you are just blowing hot air, literally. You're just blowing hot air out of your mouth, and the things you're saying don't mean anything. So, Terrence Howard, let's see some tests, let's see some predictions, and let's see some results. Terrence Howard says, you can wind up all of the satellites, talking about like moons and stuff, all of the planets in every solar system, and can wind up and get back to the real age of our universe would be gazillions of years based upon this drift. If you walk away from that Big Bang or special relativity, because that was the cause of all that, black holes came from the thought of gravity gone crazy. When gravity goes crazy, you know, light won't even be able to escape from it, because light was thought of as moving as a particular constant. We've just killed that. So gazillion means an indefinitely large number. This is his estimate based on our solar system. This sun. Gazillions of years. So triple indefinite number of years. Way beyond trillions. If we were to take this seriously, that means that Terrence Howard believes that the sun started with essentially an indefinitely large mass, as we can see and feel that the sun is constantly radiating energy, which equates to mass. If it had been doing this for a gazillions of years, and a larger amount of mass also means a larger surface area, which means more radiation. The sun also apparently literally shits out planets, and has been shown, and as has been shown, the fact that light speed is a constant was in fact not killed. I'm tripping all over myself here. Let me reread this. Okay. I'll try to draw and read my notes at the same time here. Madness. Okay, so if we were to take this seriously, that means that Terrence Howard believes that the sun started with essentially an indefinitely large mass, as we can see and feel that the sun is constantly radiating energy, which equates to mass. If it has been doing this for a gazillion years, and a larger amount of mass also means a larger surface area, and thus more radiation, the sun also apparently literally shits out planets, as has been shown. The fact that... Okay, whatever I wrote doesn't make any goddamn sense. But we have shown that the light is in fact a constant. The idea that the sun has been around for gazillions of years is absolute nonsense, because that would give it effectively infinite mass. The idea that the sun is shitting out planets over these gazillions of years doesn't hold up, because our planets orbiting the sun, even if they are drifting away from it at very small amounts, is because the sun is radiating energy constantly, which means it's losing a little bit of mass. But when a sun forms, there is a whole bunch of gas in a disk rotating around this thing, and it starts kind of shaped like this. And as the sun forms, you've got all of this gas and dust still out here, which didn't collapse to this part right here. And then all this dust and stuff starts collecting and makes a planet, and this planet clears its orbit. That's one of the definitions of a planet, is that it clears all that nonsense out of its orbit. That's why Pluto lost planethood, because it didn't fully clear its orbit and it wasn't big enough. And then you have basically all this dust that was in this thing creating all these different planets. And you know, this planet is made of a ton of dust, and guess what? We call it Jupiter. And it's very, very massive, but it's not very dense. And that's because Jupiter was almost its own star. We almost had a binary star, but it didn't quite collect enough of this dust. If you took like Saturn and Jupiter and Uranus and Neptune, if you combined all those together, maybe that could have equated to a very, very tiny star. But instead we have Jupiter. Okay. Sorry about that. My notes were a mess. Okay. Joe Rogan said, "What do you think a black hole is?" Now note that we have actual observational data of black holes. We don't see the black hole itself because it's a black hole, right? So we don't see it relative to the space around it, but we do see stars going around it over the course of years. And some stars go in orbits like this. And some stars go in orbits like this. And some stars go in orbits like this. And you can actually find a little GIF doing that around the galactic center. We actually watched all those stars, and you can see them. They go woo really fast as they get close to this mass, and you can measure based on what these orbits are, exactly where that mass is, but there's nothing to see there. And if you have a mass like this, and you have a star behind it, and then you have the Earth over here, and we're looking at this mass that we can't see, and there's the star behind it, the light from this star gets bent by the mass and hits us from two different angles, creating a ring of light. Well, if it's directly behind it, it'll be a ring. If it's over here, it'll just be it'll be a kind of a smudge like that. And we've actually seen this. We've actually seen real gravitational lensing from these objects moving around massive objects that we can't see. So we know that black holes are there. Now, we've also recently been able to see black holes with these little light things going around on them, where they look pretty funky. And you can look this up. Look up images of black holes. We have images of black holes now. Not just artistic representations, but actual images of black holes. And what you're seeing is light that is escaping and matter that is falling in, accreting around it. And around every single spiral galaxy is a super massive black hole. And it's dragging all of that galaxy around itself. That's how powerful it is. The same way that we are orbiting around the sun, our galaxy is orbiting around a black hole. And there are tons of smaller black holes all throughout the galaxy, all throughout the universe. And we can actually detect these things. And we even have the Large Interferometer Observatory or something like that, LIFO I think it's called, or LIGO, gravitational thing, where we got to experience the waves of gravity that were created by two black holes merging together. And only black holes have enough gravitational force in a small enough area to have that effect of making those gravitational waves. And we measured that on Earth by having a detector way over here and a detector way over here with interferometers that measure lengths in this direction and that direction. And when the wave hit, it was measured based on here and here, or maybe the wave hit like this. But the way that they're able to use these things to actually determine a contraction of space-time itself with gravity waves is really cool. Okay, so Terrence Howard replies to what do you think a black hole is. He says, it doesn't exist. There aren't black holes. There's no spot where energy goes in and never comes back out. All right, this is a misconception. I'm going to address that right now because I love black holes. Black holes are my favorite thing. So here's our event horizon. We don't know anything about what is behind an event horizon, but we have ideas. Now, one of these ideas is that there is a singularity at the very center. Let me just toss on a little light. So one of the ideas is that there's a singularity at the very center where all that mass is collapsed to create this. Now, we don't know that for a fact because you can't see inside a black hole. There's no light escaping, right? If you have one observer right here and one observer right here, there is actual time dilation, and we have measured time dilation. Our satellites have to account for it. Even just in orbit around the Earth, they will go off by an appreciable degree if you don't account for time dilation. The radius of this event horizon and the like how much mass is actually inside of this small radius is what causes the black hole to form. Time moves much slower here than it does here. And it's not just an optical illusion. You might have 10 seconds elapse here and 100 seconds elapses here. So if you watch this person's clock from this position, you see their clock spinning around 10 times as fast as your clock. And if they look at your clock, they see your clock going 10 times as slow as their clock. And that's a real, actual effect. Time dilation is real. At the event horizon of the black hole, the time dilation graph goes to infinity, which means that even if you fall into this black hole at in a finite amount of time from your perspective, this person's perspective, they see and there's no renormalization here. This is just happening. There is an infinite amount of time before you will have your last moment reaching that event horizon. That is what the math says happens. It's not an optical illusion. It's a real time dilation effect. And if you are just about to impact the event horizon and you look back at the universe, you will see an infinite amount of time. It'll start slow and it'll speed up. It'll be just like seeing a light wave that goes like that to infinity. Except it's time that's doing this. Which means that from our earthly perspective, anything that is currently falling into a black hole will take an infinite amount of time from an Earth perspective to reach that black hole. Which means that all the information contained in whatever is falling towards this black hole is not lost. It has not crossed the event horizon yet. The only way it will cross the event horizon is if you fall into the black hole, and you cross the event horizon with it, and guess what? An infinite amount of time will take place over here. Even like from here to here, there's an infinite amount of time that'll take place here before this last moment happens. Which means that this object hits the singularity, and this object hits the singularity, and or the event horizon, and this object hits the event horizon, this object hits the event horizon. All these objects are going to hit the event horizon at the exact same time. And none of them will hit before any other one hits. Which means there is no information paradox. That was just bad math. I love black holes. Black holes are amazing. And if you don't understand time dilation, you best figure it out. It's cool. Okay, let's go back to what Terrence Howard was saying. So he says, there's no spot where energy goes in and never comes back out. There's no place in the universe where the information paradox occurs. Where there is an imbalance, something gets contracted and never comes out. That's not how the universe behaves. It comes in and it goes out. When Newton said that gravity pulls down, if he had stayed with that apple, yes, the apple was attracted to light conditions on the Earth. It was attracted to light conditions. If he stayed another week or 2 weeks watching that apple, he would have watched the gases go right back up to where they were equalized. Everything, if it comes this way, it has to go this way. If you breathe in, you breathe out. It's filling in or it's pouring out. So, what do you think they're detecting when they detect a black hole? Joe Rogan asked. Terrence Howard says, what that shift they're talking about, that's the tornado. Remember, there's a vortice. There's all these huge vortices. Everything's spinning around a vortice. So a collection of larger vortices is going to have the same thing happen at the center of the galaxy is happening at the center of a hurricane. It's happening in your toilet stool. All right, addressing this. There are no real paradoxes. A paradox is an indication of missing information, a misunderstanding, or a misrepresentation. Kind of like Zeno's paradox, where you move halfway, and then you move halfway again, 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 and you never actually get to there. So how is it that you can move past there? Well, because when we take steps, we don't take half steps. We take full steps. So that's a misrepresentation, and that's why there's Zeno's paradox. Now, if you do take that Zeno's paradox, guess what? That's how time dilation works at a black hole's event horizon. And it takes an infinite amount of time to get to that final step. And that's not a paradox. And it's also equal and opposite, right? You're chilling over here at the event horizon. This guy's chilling on Earth. Earth goes through its entire existence before you hit that event horizon. And this guy tries to see you on Earth, and at a certain point, the light is so weak coming out of you because what the light wave is doing is the light wave is going like this, right? It's going up and down in its wavelength as normal, but it is also going into the black hole at the same time. So what it looks like it's doing is it looks like the wavelength is longer, and we call that redshifting. And the closer it gets to the event horizon, the closer that light wave redshifts towards having a wavelength that is literally a solid line where there's no actual wave anymore. Once the light is at that event horizon, it is a solid line. So that electromagnetic line is still there, but there's a flow inward into the black hole that is equivalent to the speed that this wave is propagating, which means that all of that up and down motion gets literally completely flattened out. It's pretty cool. And what happens in the inside? Does it go even faster? Wild stuff. Black holes are fun. So, there are no real paradoxes. When Terrence Howard says light conditions here, he means not much pressure, I'm guessing. Terrence Howard is suggesting that gravity isn't real because apples release ethylene gas, which is a plant hormone that regulates the ripening of the fruit and is responsible for the fruit rotting as well. And because gases can flow upward, therefore gravity isn't real. That's the tornado. Terrence Howard means that there means here toroidal vortices, right? So again, kind of like the apple shape. Funny. You've got your torus, right? And you have this vortex. And you could have the Earth right here. You could have the sun right here. You could have a black hole right here. But what Terrence Howard is saying is that there's nothing right here. It's just a vortex in space on its own. And that nothing happens right here. It doesn't exceed light speed and make it so that light can't escape, even though it does. There's no singularity point where all the stuff collects. It's just a vortex that exists there for no explained reason. And it's, of course, he's saying it's a vortex in the ether rather than being the electromagnetic field of this collection of mass. And he also said that there's vortices in your toilet, right? Here's your toilet. Let's try to get an accurate representation of a toilet bowl here. The liquid goes that way. You've got your water tank. You've got your little flusher here. And you've got your water in your toilet. When you flush your toilet, there's these little jets up underneath the rim. You can't really see the jets from your perspective. But if you were to stick your head in the toilet bowl, you'd see these little holes where these little jets of water come shooting out, and they happen to have a very slight angle to them. So they put the spiral motion to help the water flow in a vortex down the tube. And if you have a bathtub drain and water in a bathtub, it naturally makes a vortex. But that's the flow of the water. There's not a vortex that just happens to be there. When you push the toilet flush handle, it doesn't spawn a vortex in space at your toilet. It's not how a toilet works. Okay. He seems to have said that there's a vortex in your toilet for the same reason that there's no black holes in space, according to him. Also, tornadoes, right? Tornadoes are high pressure and low pressure winds moving around each other. Heat rising, cold air falling. Anyway. So that's a pretty ridiculous claim. Terrence Howard says, all motion is expressed in waves. All waves are expressed in curves. All waves make spirals. Is it though? If I drop my phone stylus onto my table, it falls straight down. How is the entirety of that linear motion a wave? Where's the curve? there's an acceleration, right? So you start with a small amount of movement, and then you get more and more movement. Is that the curve? I can think of a ridiculous number of examples of waves that are not making spirals. For example, a droplet of water falls into a still pond. Splat. The droplet of water hits, it creates ripples that expand outwards that are circles, whereas a spiral would look like this. And that is not what we see when we see a wave. They look like this. Not spirals. It would take a very particular setup to make a wave spiral. I'm sure you can do it. And just like have some spinning object. You could probably make a spiral wave. It'd be really cool to see. It'd basically be a vortex. But anyway, so that claim is false. Terrence Howard says, they have a thing called zero. They go from 1 to 0 to -1. There is no zero to even think zero. How many of Terrence Howard's patents have actually been granted? 0. In physics, nothing remains still, Terrence Howard says. There's nothing that doesn't have motion because everything is connected. So if one thing is still, everything that's connected to it has to be still. There can never be one thing still. This appears to be a reference to absolute zero in regard to temperature. 0 Kelvin. Which is, and temperature is fundamentally motion, right? So what he's saying is you cannot have an object perfectly still, because if you have this other object and this object is moving, therefore this object has to move. It can't just be still. And if this object is still, then that means that this one has to be still. So it doesn't necessarily follow that this object forces this object to move. However, when you've got these energy waves vibrating through the universe, everything is moving. You know, the wave hits the particle, the wave creates the particle's in motion, the wave's in motion. The vibration of energy is creating all the energy, all the mass. The vibration of the universe's energy is why there's no absolute zero. It's not because if one thing is still, everything has to be still. Or if one thing is moving, everything has to move. It's because of the vibration of the energy itself. Why does energy constantly vibrate? Why is there energy and not just perfect stillness? The religious people think they know. Scientists don't. They don't have to know. What they know is what they experience. And that is, there is a fundamental vibration to all energy in the universe. And that's what creates everything. So, Terrence Howard says, electricity tries to get to its balanced state. Right when it gets there, magnetism takes over and pushes over, so there's this pendulum, and as soon as it gets to this state, it bounces off that other noble gas, and it makes its way up. Okay, let's pull up the chart again. Which chart do we want? This one. Okay. So magnetism takes over and pushes over, so there's this pendulum, and as soon as it gets to this state, it bounces off of that other noble gas and makes its way all the way back over here, and it's about to have equanimity, and then it gets pulled back in the other direction, and that's the breathing in and out and the pendulum effect that we've all observed in natural phenomena in the universe. Everything behaves that way. Every one of our cells comes down to our cells are made up of water, mostly water, 80 to 90% water somewhere. Water is hydrogen. Hydrogen has 12 vortices that's behaving with it, 12 opposing vortices. First of all, water is not hydrogen. Hydrogen is hydrogen, and water is 2 hydrogen molecules and 1 oxygen. Anyway, so this is another reference to Walter Russell's diagrams, with the quadrants of the circle alternating between electricity and magnetism. He's describing an abstract concept attached to a diagram, not any actual experimental results. He claims we've all observed this in natural phenomena, linking it to the idea of breathing in and out, but he's actually trying to claim that breathing in and breathing out are themselves electricity and magnetism, not even just metaphorically. The last bit is incoherent rambling about loose associations. Cells have water. Water has hydrogen. Terrence Howard claims, without any actual data, that hydrogen has 12 vortices. Therefore, nothing. It wasn't actually going anywhere. Also, cells are not 80 to 90% water. Human bodies range from about 50 to 70% water, and about 60% of that, which is 30 to 46%, is inside of the cells. Different cells contain different amounts of water. Joe Rogan asks, what happens to these suns when they supernova? And Terrence Howard says, everything gets old and dies, recompresses, has to. If you breathe out, what happens to that air? Another plant breathes that air in. Everything behaves the same way. And then he makes reference to waves colliding. Yes, from other star systems, they have expanding solar winds. So when they meet our planet, our star meets the solar wind from another star, the end of that spot, and now there's 2 pressure conditions. So you have another Lagrange spot that's happening there. That's when those waves start coming back, but they get hit, and they hit at 120-degree angles, because that's how the universe is arranged. Now these things become electric, so instead of coming from the planar side and expanding out at the equator, now they come back up from the northern and southernmost parts. So Joe Rogan says, so does this account for stellar nurseries? Terrence Howard replies, yes, all of these things are just pressure conditions hitting each other, and they're causing it. That's where the Birkeland currents are running through, those higher electrical fields. But everything in the universe is just electricity, and we call it magnetism when it's devitalized, but it's still electricity. We call it the radiative side, it's the feminine side, and the contractive side is the positive, the masculine side. It's a balance, and it's never been anything but that balance, and we've complicated it with a lie. So earlier, Terrence Howard said that Lagrange spots were due to magnetic fields. Now he's using them to define pressure conditions in the ether. And he's also claiming these pressures around stars are waves that propagate outward and bounce off of each other and return. Near the very start, he said that the universe wasn't infinite because the waves have to bounce off of something, and now he's saying that they're bouncing off of other stars. And it's not very consistent. He claims that the waves hit each other at 120-degree angles because that's how the universe is arranged, suggesting that all stars are arranged specifically at points that correspond to some scale of the flower of life. Let's go back to that real quick. This thing. Okay, so the 120-degree angles that he's talking about are related to these triangles. So he's saying that all stars are arranged in the same way that you see this flower of life pattern. Yes, that's where he's getting the 120-degree angle from. This is an incredibly easily refuted claim. It's false. Stars are absolutely not arranged in a regular grid. You can see that very plainly. Direct observation isn't being considered in regard to these claims, although it is claimed to be, without any attempt to show it. The closest we get is you breathe in and you breathe out, therefore this polygon is hydrogen with 12 vortices, and it is concave because you have to breathe in, and it is pointy because you have to breathe out. And things breathe in through the poles and breathe out through the equators, except when they don't. And it appears that nothing does this, not one example. There are definitely some lies going on somewhere. There is, in fact, a balance to nature and existence, and we see it with the electric charge, both positive and negative electric charge, which flow together when they align, and they push against each other when they're opposed. It's really amazing, and it's a beautiful thing, but it doesn't work the way Terrence Howard has been claiming, which is really all of Walter Russell's claims. Terrence Howard is just parroting them. Joe Rogan says, "If you're right, so many people are wrong." Terrence Howard replies, "Everyone's wrong. The universe backs me up, and I have the proof of it. You have all of these physicists that's saying something different, but none of them have 97 patents. None of them have introduced a new form of flight with unlimited in-air bonding. None of them have discovered supersymmetrical systems. This is what we've done. This is what the collective is able to do when you put yourself into the divine space. Now we write new axioms and new postulates based off of the real wave conjugations. Now we adjust our understanding of our physics, to fit natural phenomena, and then we are in balance with it, and we have to let go of this idea of this currency. We are the only creatures in the known universe that uses currency, that uses an indirect form of payment rather than direct exchange. We have to get past that point, and that's the hard thing, because this entire world is run on that, and that's where 1 × 1 = 2 came into its real birth. Okay. So Terrence Howard also doesn't have 97 patents. Not even 97 filed patents, let alone granted, which he has 0. I'm very curious why he claims this specific number. Terrence Howard also hasn't introduced a new form of flight, but he did show that a CGI video of an idea that may or may not actually fly. I'd love to see a working model, in-air bonding included. Terrence Howard also has not discovered any supersymmetrical systems. That's all of his justification for why he's right and everyone else is wrong. I guess we'll have to go to Leonardo da Vinci to figure out how things work. That guy invented a lot of stuff, including fancy flying machines that literally were proven to work. And the divine space that Terrence Howard is talking about, I've put myself into that space before. It's a nice space. I'm also an avid lucid dreamer. I've been lucid dreaming since I was 7 years old. I'm currently 41. New axioms and postulates based off of the real wave conjugations, these concave polyhedrons. Since wave conjugation here means where curve meets, where are the fake wave conjugations? Is that platonic solids, where straight lines meet in this context? So if they aren't wave conjugations, if we go by the same convention, we'd have to call them, well, I guess we couldn't call them anything, because in this convention, straight lines don't exist. However, since all of the ways that Terrence Howard's concave polyhedrons can be arranged are also the ways that platonic solids can be arranged, right? I can do a quick drawing for you. We're going to draw a very poor octahedron here. So here's an octahedron. It's just like the concave octahedron, except it's got flat planes and straight lines. And then we're going to draw a tetrahedron coming off of it over here, lining up just like that. We're going to draw a tetrahedron coming off of the other side down there. And look at that. That is exactly like the Huntian, or was it, no, not the Huntian. The Huntian is the tetrahedron, or the octahedron. So this thing, this shape, which is made out of platonic solids, is exactly like the Mira shape. The thing that he says is light, a photon. That's made out of regular old tetrahedrons. They arrange in the exact same ways. And he's claiming that his does something that doesn't. And I can't fathom why he makes that claim. So I'm curious to see what these new axioms and postulates would look like. I'm also curious to see what the old axioms and postulates there are that are based on platonic solids. Also, neat thing, we see crystals that form actual platonic solid shapes. I've never seen a crystal form any of Terrence Howard's specifically concave polyhedral shapes. If you want a quick example, a fluoride crystal forms octahedrons. Adjusting our understanding of physics to fit natural phenomena is what science is all about. As Richard Feynman famously stated, science is the art of not fooling yourself. I love that quote. It would be interesting to see a purely barter-based economy at this scale of civilization. I'd love to see a working conception of it. An ideal currency economy allows for a perfect exchange, but in reality it only creates more imbalance. It's well past time for nature to sort out the massive imbalance in our currency economy. I can't even pay my rent this month. I've been working myself to the bone my whole life, to the point of utter exhaustion, like many people in this world, and I have very little to show for it. And somehow I'm still doing better than a majority of the people in the world. I have some clothes, I eat at least one meal a day, I have shelter, I can take care of a cat, I have a phone and a computer. I'm thankful for every single part of my existence, but that does not change the fact that there is a massive imbalance. And even with all that I have, I too am on the short end of the stick. Terrence Howard says, but their technology is antiquated compared to mine. There's no government on this planet that has the technology that I have or can outdo what I have, because you can't outdo the fractal. Well, Terrence, one of the most famous fractals is called the Sierpinski fractal, and it uses triangles which have straight lines. And that's a fractal. So saying that you can't outdo the fractal isn't really much of an argument when you're trying to argue against straight lines and platonic solids, which can be made up of a bunch of these fractals all put together, and in fact have evidence of existing in nature. Also, I suppose Terrence Howard hasn't seen that Tic Tac video, because, or maybe he forgot, because that thing is definitely not obeying the laws of physics that we understand. Somebody out there has some serious technology. And yeah, I am absolutely suggesting that our shadow government has technology that is beyond anything that the general public has ever conceived of. So next, Terrence says, square root of 2 loop square root of 2 times 2 equals the square root of 2 to the third power, basically. He says that's an unnatural equation, and every quantum mechanics and quantum physics equation that has the square root of 2 in there. We've been living this lie, in this falsehood lie, for so long. So I've already addressed why the square root of 2 multiplied by 2, or sorry, yeah, the square root of 2 multiplied by 2 and the square root of 2 to the third power are the same. We've gone over that plenty. He also says the solution is learning how to multiply volumetrically. We've done that too, with 1 times 1 times 1 equals 1 cube. He says that's how the universe multiplies. And he says, and I've already produced all these things, like his concave polyhedras. He's got these little plastic and wire models of his little tetrahedrons and the other shapes. So multiplying volumetrically. So I guess he doesn't mean multiplying by width and length and height like we do in classical mathematics. I'm really trying to understand what he means here, and all I'm getting, based on everything that he has already said, is that he means addition. Like 2 plus 2 equals 4, therefore 1 plus 1 equals 2. Apparently that's volumetrically, because you're increasing the volume. That's what I'm getting here. Let's also talk about where the square root of 2 comes from. Pretty sure it's this. Because a squared plus b squared equals c squared. So if we square 1, it's equal to 1. If we square 1, that's also equal to 1. If we add those together, that's equal to 2. Which means that c squared is equal to 2. So if a is 1 and b is 1, by taking the square root of 1, which equals 1, then if we take the square root of 2, we get c. So if you have a triangle with a right angle, 90-degree angle, which is a diagonally cut square, and these lengths are length 1, like 1 inch, for example, then this length can be measured to be 1.414235, etc. inches, if this is 1 inch and this is 1 inch. And that value is the square root of 2. And it exists in physical space. It's real. And that's why the square root of 2 shows up in equations. It's because of that right triangle. Okay. I've been going for 6 hours and 47 minutes straight. I'm getting exhausted. I should have broken this up. Okay. Terrence Joe Rogan says, how does the universe multiply volumetrically as opposed to the way, and then Terrence Howard cuts in and says, it does not move does not linearly, it does not walk on. All of our math is based on a two-dimensional projection. What they do in calculus, they will reduce one of the action, they'll reduce the action of all things. They'll keep trying to reduce it down to one moment because they believe Newton's first law, that everything moves in a straight line, where everything is still acted upon. They forget that everything is in motion, that concerted motion is a necessity. They have to include all the other forces involved in order to have equanimity in their equations. So Joe Rogan asks, so how in a practical sense does this affect mathematics? Because remember, he asked, how does the universe multiply volumetrically? And that was Terrence Howard's response. So how in a practical sense does this affect mathematics? Terrence Howard says, well, once we let go of Cartesian space and 90-degree angles, well, picture this. Let's take another practical look at a computer chip. It has all of these 90-degree turns on it. A computer chip. It has all of these 90-degree turns on it. And you know, maybe he means like stuff going like this, you know. Maybe that's what he means by computer chip. Yeah. Typically where they run electricity, can you imagine running at 186,624 miles per second in one direction, and you hit a wall and you've got to stop, bounce off that wall, and you pick up your speed and bounce off the next wall, and you bounce off the next and the next and the next? How much heat are you building up? How much friction is being built up from the interference in comparison to if it was just spherical, just going around? It would build up no heat, and if you allow it to be spiral, which my patent was talking about, that first patent, you'll be able to utilize all that energy, so you don't need the cooling systems. You don't need all this loss or entropy. None of that occurs when you go by the universe's standards. That's all they have to do, is follow what the universe does. We have the contractive side patented, ready and available. We have the expanding side patented, worked out already, ready and available. And we've got the constitution between the two of them. But how does that... Joe Rogan then asks again, but how does that affect in the practical sense? If you're using math on a calculator, what's wrong with what the calculator is saying? Terrence Howard says the calculator right now is still saying that we're on the linear path, and it's just multiplying things in a compartmentalized space. So, calculus is a brute force method of measuring the area or volume of a given shape, which includes a curve. By applying smaller and smaller rectangles within the curve. So you start by filling the space with rectangles as much as you can. And then you use smaller rectangles, and smaller rectangles, and smaller rectangles, and smaller rectangles, and none of them actually stick out of the curve like this. They're all underneath the curve. So you just use smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller rectangles, and you literally extrapolate these tiny little rectangles that you're adding together to infinity, such that you essentially get the exact area of this curve by brute force. It's quite clever, and it's also a pain in the ass to mix calculus with trigonometry. Try doing that with a calculator. Like when you've got the derivative values of the sine of 37 degrees, and you wanna derive that, it gets ridiculous. You have to memorize it. So it's horrendous, and we used to have books full of the various values, so that you didn't have to manually calculate it every time. That's where math stops being calculated and starts being memorized. Since Terrence Howard is equating calculus to 2 dimensions, I'm guessing he never got far enough in calculus to handle measuring volume or 3D spaces with it, because you do indeed measure 3-dimensional spaces and not just spheres. You can just use pi to calculate the volume of a sphere. In calculus, you can measure the volume of a cloud of any shape. Yeah, literally any shape. You could have a shape like this, and it's got bumps all over the place, and you can use calculus to put little boxes in there, smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller sizes until you get the entire actual volume of that space. And that's why calculus is cool and useful. And you need trigonometry to do the curved spaces in those volumes. As for electricity flowing through anything that isn't a superconductor, it generates heat based on the resistance to the flow. And it's not the 90-degree angles creating the resistance. It's the material itself. So transistors in computer chips flip between low resistance and high resistance. This is what generates most of the heat. A curved or coiled wire with electricity flowing through it also generates heat. If it didn't, that would have been discovered before Terrence Howard was even born, and it would be a fundamental part of every electrical system that we have. Therefore, his disdain for specific angles and coordinate systems is based on a fundamental misunderstanding of the nature of the flow of electricity through a system. I guarantee that no one told him about his conception of it. Terrence Howard definitely thought that one up himself. I would love to see Terrence Howard build a computer with only curving circuits and include absolutely no cooling. I want to see that. I'll bring a fire extinguisher. So Joe Rogan asked him, so by reductionist viewpoint, by breaking things down to simple numbers, you really can't just do that? And I think Joe Rogan was just saying that. Terrence Howard jumped in and says, you can't, or you can try, but it's like the piano. Remember the piano? The earlier pianos they had before they compartmentalized and everything. Remember, everything in the universe expands as a sphere. Everything, even music, expands as a sphere. But what they did with the piano is they took all the 12 notes. Now, what he's talking about are both the white keys on the piano and the black keys on the piano, right? So he's talking about all the 12 notes on the piano. We'll just say I drew 12 there, right? He's talking about piano keys. So let me find my spacing. Okay. So, but what they did with the piano is they took all the 12 notes and they just started them all over again instead of accounting for the expansion, that space. So you would never, if you're looking at the periodic table, you would never get to the titanium or to the rubidium or to the cesium, because they would all keep it with just the 7 tones. They don't allow for the necessary expansion, so you don't have all these other isotopes. Hold on, I'm going to draw some more. I want to draw all of them. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. There's those, and then you get 5 of the black keys going here. There you go. There's your 12 notes. There's your 7 tones. Okay. Continuing on. Okay. So he says, so you don't have all these other isotopes to use because they keep things here. You don't allow your child. Nope, nope, nope. You're not going to get taller. I need you to stay just at 4 feet. That's the high. That's how high you can go. You will not be able to. You will not be allowed to go further. And we naturally keep growing and expanding out, so they have to allow that. But their math doesn't allow it because it believes in two-dimensional space. And remember, there are no two-dimensional spaces because in order for anything to be perceived, it has to be measurable. And measurable needs 3 dimensions, but it actually needs 4. It needs your perspective. You are the 4th dimension. That's what Walter Russell also talked about, that it was 4 things coming together. That's what woke me back up, and I was like, 4 bubbles meeting. But he still believed in the idea of straight lines. He was still hemmed in by it. And he's right, it becomes a cubed sphere, becomes a point where everything comes together. Okay. So, he said they just started them all over again. So you mean the octaves? Oh my goodness. Okay. So Terrence Howard doesn't understand harmonics as well as he thought, or piano strings. And more false equivalence in this mention of the elements on the periodic table. And math covers much more than two-dimensional space. Just wait until Terrence Howard learns about the square root of -1. Imaginary space, which is orthogonal to 3-dimensional space. Orthogonal to the number line anyway. And also, I'd just like to say that my computer monitor represents a 2-dimensional space, or rather presents a two-dimensional space where measurement can occur. So, claim refuted. Also, since I am the observer of the 2-dimensional space of my computer screen, that makes me the 3rd dimension as well. Neat thing about dimensions, how you label them is entirely convention. So Joe Rogan said, is it because we can create straight lines that we get confused? It's being a little cheeky there. Terrence Howard says, you can't create it because when you look at it under an electron microscope, you see all the little curved dots that make it up. There are no straight lines. The straight lines are an illusion. Again, we are being fooled by our senses because there is no straight motion in a straight line. So all these homes that they're building, and they keep wondering, why are they going over? Why don't you make the homes look like a mushroom? Follow the curvature of nature, and you won't have to worry about rebuilding them in hurricane zones and tornado zones. They'll go right over it. They don't make airplanes just a straight box. They've allowed it to be aerodynamic and curve. They moved away from straight lines in that aspect. In boats, they don't have, Noah's Ark moving across like. They don't do that. Like I said, no man would be attracted to a Cartesian woman, a Euclidean woman, something just straight like this. We need curvature, like Alan Watts said. We need the wiggles. We like the wiggles attached to her. It would be easier to make the curved ones homes, but he's talking about homes. But all of our technology is built on these bricks of these platonic solids. So now we have new building materials with what I've introduced. Entirely new building materials that are proven and super symmetrical, that you don't have to just stay with a rectangle. You can do anything you want, and you can produce energy. Man, I'm getting really tired. So it might be more accurate to say that straight lines are an abstraction than an illusion. The concept of straight lines absolutely exists, and Newton's laws of motion are direct observations that have nothing to do with the scale of observation. If you were to place a point on the surface of a sphere and expand that sphere, the point moves in a literal straight line. So we have a sphere, right? And we expand that sphere out. if we put a point on the sphere, as the sphere expands, that point on the sphere, on the larger sphere, it's a straight line from here to here. Also, I'm all for mushroom-shaped houses. That sounds super cool. Here's a little mushroom with this little skirt and this little cap and its stem, and then it's all mycelium. Forgot the word there for a second. Okay. So I'm all for mushroom-shaped homes. We could do with more beautiful architecture in our cities. Our cities are pretty ugly, and I blame capitalism. They make something passably functional for as little cost as possible to maximize the capital. That's the majority of our modern architecture. Curved lines, however, don't make a mushroom-shaped house tornado-proof. That roof cap is totally coming off, guaranteed, in a tornado. I'd like to point out to Terrence Howard the F-117 Nighthawk, which is vaguely shaped like this. It's a terrible drawing of an F-117 Nighthawk, but it's all straight lines. It's not a box, but it is a flying machine that is entirely straight lines. As for a Cartesian woman, he means a woman made of straight lines, because Cartesian coordinates are on the x, y, and z planes, and you can totally have curves defined within these three-dimensional Cartesian coordinates. That's what calculus is all about. And we could make a joke about Minecraft here. Euclidean also. There are lots of curves in Euclidean space, even hyperbolic spaces like our reality, which look Euclidean up close. Terrence Howard claims it would be easier to create curved homes. Curved structures would be more stable, probably. I don't know if they would be easier to create. That claim is dubious. Capitalism would have us all over curved buildings if it were more efficient. Bricks used in building construction are not a platonic solid either. This is a brick, and that is a rectangular object. A cube is a platonic solid. Now, obviously, he means that the brick is a stretched out cube, but that's not a platonic solid. It does use straight lines, though. So anyway, Terrence Howard is claiming here that we make rectangular bricks to build rectangular buildings because of platonic solids. And that's not really a solid argument. Terrence Howard is claiming that his concave polygons are better building materials. And that they somehow produce energy. Well, if they are better building materials, let's see it then. Let's see you build a building out of your tetratarions and your huntions and your Mira shapes and the Aubrey shape. Let's see you build some buildings out of that stuff, and let's also see it produce energy. Terrence Howard says, "Watch as this spins. I call it a light sculpture. This is my transcendental lighting, a new form of lighting. But this is repeating, this is rebuilding, and predicting the entire wave field of how it behaves. That's how the magnetic field. I can completely change the lighting industry, and that's just one of the conjugations. Inside of the gift that I gave you, you'll see how the magnetic field bonds interacts with how they overlap." So here Terrence Howard has a hanging vertical light tube, and it does look pretty cool, especially when it's spinning. He says it's a new form of lighting, and it's a new form of lighting in the same way that a lamp is a new form of lighting compared to a ceiling-mounted light bulb. It appears to be using LED lights. So Terrence Howard says, This is the decay of the light field. When it becomes a magnetic thing in the magnetic expression, light is blue. No, electricity is blue. Light comes out in yellow and red. And then he says, even though I've written, we've got 3 papers that's been peer-reviewed. You know the geometry of the proton and the tetrotarion. That's been peer-reviewed. He said there's no way this guy knows any of this stuff. I think he's talking about like a professor at one of the colleges that he was checking out. So he says electricity is blue and that light comes in yellow and red. No. What? That's complete nonsense. The primary colors are red, green, and blue for one. And it's subtractive color. Paint and ink are additive. Let's make some space for ink here. With ink, we go with magenta and cyan and yellow. And these are that's a terrible yellow. And these are additive colors. You can also do, like red, blue, and yellow. But the convention tends to be these for the additive colors and these for the subtractive colors. Interesting. What do you know? Positive and negative. A balance. And these all together create black. And those all together, the other ones, create white. It's in balance. So, yeah, paint and ink, additive. I didn't find any evidence for the peer-reviewed papers, unless he meant that the peers reviewing the papers were like his wife and kids and maybe his neighbor. I would like to see these peer-reviewed papers if they exist. Terrence Howard says, I was really angry. I was going to use all the knowledge that I had, and I was going to destroy mankind. Let's keep this quote in mind for later. Luckily, his wife talked him out of becoming a Marvel villain. And then Terrence says, if you count the struts and watch how many struts bond as it becomes this right here, and he's showing his tetrotarian shape, or not the tetrotarian. He's showing the other one. He's showing his the linchpin shape. So this thing over here, and he combines them together. And as he combines them together, the number of edges that touch as they combine is what he's talking about here. So he says you'll see 1, 2, 3, and we know this is magnetism because it's expanding in the center. Now you'll see 6 of these bonds, and those colors going across there, that's basically the periodic table. And then the last one comes in, and now you have your 9, it's 4 linchpins coming together. The first 2 shapes connect along 3 lines, the next one connects along 6 lines, and then the last one connects along 9 lines. So you have the 3, 6, 9, and it's back to that same fractal. Tesla, he was talking about these numbers, this interaction, the 3, 6, 9, but this is all of them coming around the tetrotarion at 120 degrees. This is how they all behave, and this is the fractal because it keeps getting back to these 4 vortices. So he's tessellating 3D space, creating, starting with this thing with the 4 lines in it, and creating a shape that has 4 shapes on it. So that's what he means by the fractal in that regard. I think it would be really cool if this had anything to do with unifying. Oh, sorry, I skipped one part. He said, or maybe I didn't. He says this is the grand unified field put together. And wouldn't that be cool if this actually had anything to do with unifying the strong nuclear force, the weak nuclear force, and the electric force? If you recall, when he was introducing his concave shapes, he said maybe the Huntian, the octahedron, was the strong nuclear force, and maybe the tetrotarion is the weak nuclear force, and he based that on the fact that his octahedral shape has 6 points on it and 8 faces. That was his reasoning. And then the weak one, sorry, the tetratarion might be the weak nuclear force because the octahedron might be the strong nuclear force, while it's also being hydrogen. He also claimed that he put together the grand unified field equation when he was 7 or 8 years old, if you recall. I don't see an equation here, and equating this shape to the grand unified field is literally baseless. Terrence Howard then says, "Now I want to show you electricity, and you'll see 5 linchpins bonding, and you'll see that it collapses the dodecahedron, and that's the release of energy, that it'll still make the same tetrahedral space." He basically just rearranged the linchpin shapes in a different way, so they're not lining up along the lines that they were before, and they have some gaps in them. And then Terrence Howard says, "So when I talk about materials engineering now being able to be manipulated, and you can see that the dodecahedron has been collapsed, and this other, because electricity is seeking higher pressure conditions, it's more dense, something, and these 5 will keep bonding 5s, building predictable structures, not haphazard things. 4 of these will come together and make a larger tetrahedron, and then those bond and make..." And he keeps going on, but that's the majority of the claims he made right there. So he's talking about tessellation, and it's pretty cool. MC Escher would definitely approve, minus the arbitrary insertion that this has anything at all to do with electricity or ether pressure. Terrence Howard says, "This is Jesus walking on water. This is the proof in the pudding. They don't have this for their chemical engineering programs now. They don't need those models and just a ball and just that little rod anymore. They don't have what's necessary. The carbon line is that yellow line in between them. And when we put this in a solar apex and replace the sun with it, it predicts every star in the galactic plane. When we put this in a solar apex and replace the sun with it, it predicts every star in the galactic plane, the ecliptic plane, and the celestial plane. Every single star it predicts, and when we put groups of linchpins, it predicts entire relationships. So now that's why I said the Heisenberg uncertainty principle is out the window, because now with this combined with the wave conjugations, or with the mirror shapes, you can, whether it's expanding or contracting, you can now predict precisely where everything shall occur. And linchpins have been, I've included all of that into the AI for the linchpins. And the best thing about IBM and all those other companies, Raytheon taking my patent and making money off of it, since I have priority, since I invented it, I can now use any innovation they've done off of my patent and not have to pay them a licensing fee. So, to use the same metaphor, there's no pudding. It's just the equivalent of a scribble on a piece of paper that he's calling pudding, not even a recipe for pudding. His claim about stars in a galactic plane hasn't been shown, and if it's anything like the Saturn proof, it's like putting a bunch of bouncy balls in a box and saying that the balls form a box shape without needing gravity. Let me break it down. They made a toroidal boundary, some spherical boundaries, and placed a bunch of vortex jets in the middle, all pushing outward, then let loose a bunch of particles which were pushed to the edges of the artificial boundaries. I say artificial because they were placed there, not created by any natural phenomena. They were not the result of anything, the way that a magnetic toroidal field is the result of electromagnetic flow. They just placed it there. The Heisenberg uncertainty principle is related to what I mentioned earlier, the bowling ball and bowling pins example. When you can't see what you're measuring and you have to interact with it to measure it, you can't determine both the speed and the position with any accuracy simultaneously because you can't see it. It's too small to observe without disturbing with the method of observation, like hitting it with light. In the bowling ball example, the bowling ball would be the light and the bowling pin would be the electron. Even Terrence Howard doesn't know how his concave polygons throw the Heisenberg uncertainty principle out the window. He's just saying it. You can't, he says, you can now predict precisely where everything shall occur. That's location. That's not velocity. His claim about needing to pay licensing fees, I literally don't even have to research that claim. His patent was never granted. He abandoned it. He has no legal rights to anything that references the patent, which was never granted, which amounts to no technological invention, even if it had been granted, because it's a design patent. It's not even a utility patent. Terrence Howard says, in nature, an animal isn't given horns unless it needs it. So for our society as humans, we wouldn't be given this information right now unless we needed it, unless it was necessary for our continued existence and survival. We're about to destroy our planet, but with this we don't need to. We don't need to because we now know how to use the universe properly, where you can multiply with that gun. We get more energy out of it than we put in, which physics says is impossible. And they gave me the patents to it, but nobody wants to have a conversation. He also says, but once we get pushed out further, what happens? We need nitrogen to expand, to unwind into oxygen. But since we get pushed farther out, the nitrogen is so far out, we have to go deeper underground to have the pressure conditions that was equal to us having 93 million miles away from the sun. The deeper underground we go, the less light we have, and as a result of that, skin begins to gray, eyes get bigger, and all of those necessary things we see in Aliens and all of that ends up taking place. So earlier he said that he could use his knowledge, this information, to destroy the Earth. Now he's saying it's the only thing that can save it, because 1 × 1 = 1 is doomed for us all. We haven't been using the universe properly because we've been using elementary math that is consistent, and we've been using straight lines and platonic solids. But with Terrence Howard's imaginary lightning gun, we can save the world by breaking the natural balance of the conservation of energy. Wait a minute. I thought that being in balance was what Terrence Howard was saying was a good thing. I have a feeling that Terrence Howard hasn't done the math on how deep we will need to go into the Earth per centimeter that we drift away from the sun. Luckily, it will take about a gazillion years for it to matter, so we can take our time figuring that one out. Also, aliens. A gazillion years ago, humans existed on Ceres before they popped it with a hadron collider, and they had to go underground, but not too far because their planet was a bubble, not a solid sphere. And while underground, but not too far, they became gray aliens because they were too far from the sun and underground, and that's just what happens. Terrence Howard says, why is it that white people are allergic to the sun? Because they lived in a pressure condition where there is not as much sun there. So speaking of angles of incidence, the real use of those words, depending on where you are on the Earth, the sunlight hits at a different angle. At high angles, the light is more diffuse. You can experiment with this yourself at home with a flashlight. If you shine a flashlight directly at a surface, it's brighter and more concentrated than if you shine the same amount of light at an angle. Also, different parts of the Earth have different climates, which includes how often there are clouds. Maybe that's what Terrence Howard meant when he said pressure condition here. He maybe meant more clouds. Or maybe he meant that people had to go underground because they were too far away from the sun and they started turning into gray aliens, but they're only partway there. So then Terrence Howard said, and we have the CERN collider smashing these living things together because the protons, they're alive, everything is conscious. Where is consciousness existing in mankind? I have a picture showing hemoglobin, human blood, and chlorophyll, which is he's calling plant blood. And you're going to notice that hemoglobin has the same exact combination of carbon and hydrogen that we have. The only difference is the only difference they have is the center of theirs is magnesium, and the center of ours is iron. That's the only difference. You put a cephalopod up there, it would be copper. The same interaction. So where does consciousness occur? Where does the sentient being? Is it just in the iron? Or is it in the magnesium that goes with the pressure condition, like the cephalopod? It has to have copper at its base because the pressure condition, the same experience, just under a different temporal dimension. Change the pressure condition, change the motion condition, you change the organism, it adapts. But it's the same living principle. There's no difference between us and plants, and the people are chopping down and ripping things off just because we can't hear them scream. It's wrong. Okay, so to address this claim, I guess we'll have to stop smashing things together, like mining ore for materials to make buildings, because the rocks are also conscious. Also, don't eat anything, because we know for certain that all of that is alive, so don't smash them with your teeth or dissolve them in your stomach. As for hemoglobin and chlorophyll, they do have a few similarities, but they are not the same. There is more than just iron and magnesium that is different about their composition. And putting copper in place of magnesium makes for a different kind of chlorophyll. So if you have a faulty premise, it leads to incorrect conclusions. And I have those pulled up here. So here's chlorophyll. There's a whole bunch of different kinds of chlorophyll. You'll see that there is nitrogen. There's 4 nitrogens around the middle here with a manganese in the middle, or magnesium in the middle here. But you'll notice that on this one, for example, you've got like oxygen over here. I don't know if you can see my cursor. Here we go, cursor time. Okay, so magnesium in the middle, surrounded by nitrogen. It's got this particular structure. You've got the oxygens over here, and then you've got like oxygen here. Here's a hydrogen. And then over here, on this version of chlorophyll, you've got hydrogen up here, some nitrogens, some more oxygens. Over here, oxygens, hydrogens. Over here, oxygens, hydrogens, like that. If we go to the chlorophyll F, and you just ignore this little thing sticking off of it, I think this is what he was referencing. It's got CH2 up here, CH3 over here, and then CH3, CH3, that's carbon and 3 hydrogens, carbon and 3 hydrogens, carbon and 2 hydrogens. And then that's oxygen, carbon, 3 hydrogens. And then there's oxygen, 3 hydrogens and a carbon, and there's an oxygen. So here's a chlorophyll. We've got magnesium, some nitrogens. Now let's look at hemoglobin. So hemoglobin, you've got CH2, right? So we had CH2, that lines up. Then we have CH3, that lines up. Then we have CH2 on our hemoglobin, and we have CH3 on the chlorophyll. Or sorry, that was the wrong one. This one, CH3 here, and CH2 here. Then you have a CH3 here and a CH3 here. So this one is different. And then you have oxygen there, and you do not have that oxygen on the hemoglobin. However, you do have carbon, oxygen, oxygen, hydrogen, and carbon, oxygen, oxygen, hydrogen. And then if you look at the hemoglobin, you have oxygen, carbon, hydrogen, hydrogen, hydrogen. It's not quite the same. It's a bit different. And then you have hydrogen 3 and carbon, and hydrogen 3 and carbon. And you have hydrogen 3 and carbon here, but then oxygen here. So, and then the magnesium in the center, obviously, we've got the iron in the center. So while there are some similarities to hemoglobin and chlorophyll, which is pretty cool, it's more than just magnesium that's changing. And then if you look at the blood of an octopus, a cephalopod, that looks totally different. You've got 3 nitrogens surrounding a copper, and then 2 oxygens in the middle here, bonding up to another copper, and then some more nitrogens, and then some nitrogens and hydrogens surrounding those. And yes, it does have copper, and that is why the blood looks blue, because of the copper. However, It is not anything like these over here. So his claims about chlorophyll in hemoglobin and whatever the heck this thing's called, hemocyanin, that was a false claim. But his claim about everything's conscious, I mean, if energy is consciousness, then yes, everything is conscious, and it is the structure of the materials, of the atoms, that determines the complexity of that thing and determines whether or not it is able to move, right? We've got all kinds of interesting systems inside of our body that allow us to move, like the muscles and the tendons and all that, and the nerves telling the muscles how to move, and those nerve cells, and biology is amazing. And it's the electricity moving through there that's basically the driving force. And it's the energy of the electricity that I am under an understanding of as the consciousness. So everything is conscious, including the rocks, including the protons and the electrons and everything in the universe. But humans chop up things that do audibly scream as well. So plants wouldn't get off the hook by making noise. And no sympathy for protons out there. And for anyone listening, don't be myopic about this. There are plenty of other animals that are way nastier than humans. Humans don't have exploding corkscrew genitalia to combat maze-like genitalia. Go look up ducks. There's even worse examples than ducks. And smart animals too, like dolphins. Look into it. Terrence Howard says, "My view is this. If you know one thing about one thing, you know one thing about all things. Find the common factor and either multiply or divide, and that common factor happens to be hydrogen. Everything that we observe in the observable universe we see is 99% hydrogen. Well, now we have the geometry of hydrogen, so we can manipulate 99% of the universe. And there's nothing we can't accomplish, but they're still trying to make that money." To respond, there's literally nothing to support the idea that the tetratarion is hydrogen. New ways of manipulating hydrogen would be new ways of making that money. So, what new ways exactly? Well, there aren't any proposed yet. Terrence Howard then says, "The Sumerians were given their number system. That's where 1 times 1 equals 1 came from, and their system of straight lines and platonic solids. My thoughts is the individuals that wanted us here, whatever work, whatever manipulation they did for us, they wanted us to have a system of measurement, but something that could not contradict, not giving us the full picture. So they gave us a limited scope where we can measure small areas, but we would never need the larger areas. We would never need to move in and out or move out in space because we were engineered for a particular reason." Right. So Terrence Howard is saying we exist to mine gold, the Anunnaki legend, and therefore that's why 1 times 1 equals 1, because the Anunnaki forced us so that we wouldn't be able to explore space. Okay. So Terrence Howard also says you don't use power to go from one place to another. You decouple from the electric pool. You decouple from the Earth, and guess what? The Earth pulls away from you at its speed. That's all you really need to do, but they didn't know how to decouple. In 2 years, I won't need propellers, anymore. I'll use molecular excitation, which is all inside of the patents that I put in there. Okay, to respond. So the first time that I heard of decoupling, it was in relation to the Higgs field, actually. The idea being that you no longer are limited by inertia because you're decoupled from what's giving you mass. And then any velocity that you already had goes to light speed automatically in that direction because velocity includes a vector. And then to slow back down, you just recouple, gaining your mass and inertia again, which is a really neat idea. And I've never seen it done except on the internet in like TR3B videos, which aren't necessarily real footage. The molecular excitation here is a reference to the lightning gun, which breaks the laws of conservation of energy by putting electricity in water in a container which Terrence Howard claims will turn the water instantly into plasma and then shoot out lightning. Terrence Howard claims you can do that, or you can just, like with music, use a discordant tone, and those tones will push away. There's a particular tone the Earth is on, a particular tone, the key of A. It's 432 hertz, the Schumann resonance. All you have to do is have the opposite tone to that, and it will be pushed away from it. You don't, the same way a bubble at the bottom of the ocean doesn't use any energy to get to the top, but because it's completely in opposition to its environment, the environment pushes it away. That's what you do if you're an intelligent race. You use an oar if you're trying to swim across the ocean, but an intelligent species, like Alan Watts said, will use a sail, and they'll tack, and they'll make their way across. You use the energy. That's what judo is. It's supposed to be the Tao, the Tao way, which is the Wu way, which is not forcing anything. And the Japanese just say judo in a harsher sense, but it still means using the energy of your opponent against them without expressing unnecessary energy. So you just use an equal opposite force of tones. You can do all of this stuff with tone. You don't need to use any electricity beyond creating the frequency. That's what the scarab beetle uses. That's what these shapes use properly, vibrated properly. It's a levitation. Well, to address that, acoustic levitation does exist, but it works a bit differently. There are videos out there on the internet that are supposedly showing some manner of frequency directed at objects, making them fall upward at a third derivative of motion, which would be an accelerating acceleration. But no real explanation provided. It could be fake. You could always devise an experiment going through every single frequency until you get an effect. You wouldn't even need to know the specific frequency. You could just find it through pure experimentation, if such a frequency exists. There's also resonant frequencies for all matter that destabilizes it. You can break glass with sound, destroy cells, all kinds of things. The resonant frequency is the frequency of that object, so you're increasing the amplification of the frequency to the point that it breaks the bonds of the molecular structures. So Terrence Howard says, method of propulsion and decoupling. Take the frequency of the Earth and find out what's the equal and opposite tone to it. Wrap your ship in there. Decouple from the Earth. And that's what the Earth moving at. And what's the Earth moving at? 1,000 miles an hour or so? Takes 24 hours for it to get around. How quickly is our solar system spinning? Whatever that tone is, whatever that frequency is, that speed is, you decouple from the solar system. Now the solar system moves away from you. No, nothing whatsoever. No g-forces, he's saying. And that's what the linchpin, the angles of incidence, allows, because now we can decouple from the 6 relative positions. So, this is speculation. It's unverifiable claims because there's no indication of that the equal and opposite tone is supposed to actually mean, or how to wrap it around something, or what would have an effect, or rather how that would have an effect on what it was wrapped around. I'm not saying these things are impossible. I'm just saying that Terrence Howard's claims here are devoid of real substance, and many of them are either completely baseless or have faulty premises based on a lack of knowledge or understanding. Terrence Howard says, it's all frequency and the right angles of incidence. You can't get there with Cartesian space or Euclidean 90-degree, 45-degree things. You can't get there. You cannot get there. You have to have the truth. And that's why I think I was given all of these things. It was like, hey, let's stop destroying the planet. We don't need oil to do all the things you're doing. We can now take, right now, we're writing a patent. We're able to take the radioactive decayed water, the stuff that they're using to cool those rods, and use the proper angles of incidence and the proper field, and can reverse that radioactive decay in days and not take 100 years in order for it's just a change in pressure and motion conditions. When I was talking to Jeff E. about it, he was like, we can use neutrinos coming from the sun, and saw that there was a different relationship, like I was saying before, seems to happen quicker around Venus or closer to the sun. I was like, is it possible that's due to the change of the greater pressure condition that's happening, and therefore the electricity is able to have a greater effect upon it? And he was like, oh, no. How do you know the pressure is greater? You know that at Venus. And I was like, oh, you still think that there's a void? Well, we'll send a probe, and we'll send a probe there and see how the pressure increases, and send a probe out and see how the pressure decreases. The greater, closer to the sun, or the apex, or the primary, the closer to it, the higher the pressure. The further away, the less influence. Your child, my child, you get my child around me, I've got a great deal of influence on him, and he behaves the way I expect him to behave. You take him outside, to a theme park, and I'm not there, they run crazy because I'm not there to act upon them. So you can use that for propulsion at the same time. All right, to address this claim, Terrence Howard is aware that the plastic, which all of his polygons are made out of, is made of oil, right? And we have sent probes all over the solar system, including all the way out to Pluto. There's zero indication of any change in an ether pressure. There's no winding or unwinding elements. So that theory has been proven wrong. Walter Russell wrote his book before any of that happened, though. That's the last of Terrence Howard's claims that Terrence Howard made on the Joe Rogan Experience. I omitted anything that was entirely a repetition of a previous claim. I also watched his speech at Oxford. It was all the same as what was expressed here, although there was one thing that Terrence Howard said that did stick out to me. In reference to his resume, he said, I managed to climb my way out of there by doing a fancy little thing called lying. So there it is. That took, how long? 7 hours and 40 minutes and 7 seconds to go through all of Terrence Howard's claims and address them with as much charity as possible and try to understand the way he's using words like conjugation and angle of incidence and stuff. I did my very best to accurately represent everything he's trying to say, and I'm not judging him as a person. I'm sure he's a really great guy, and honestly, if he wants to debate me, I would talk to him about this, and if he wants to throw me on his team, I could straighten him out, and we could actually discuss the actual properties of the universe, and maybe, do some real science. That'd be fun. Give me a job, dude. You've got lots of money. I've got lots of knowledge. Let's go. Anyway, that's all. I'll probably end up breaking this up into a lot of parts for YouTube. And this is No One signing off.